I confronted my wife's new boyfriend, only to find him terrified. I shouted, "I'm not leaving," but the truth I discovered changed everything. I never thought I'd become one of those husbands, the kind that second-guesses everything their wife says. After 10 years of marriage, I believed Sarah and I were solid. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we were a team, or at least that's what I thought. We moved into this neighborhood about 5 years ago. It was quiet, suburban, with well-kept lawns and friendly neighbors. Right across from us lived Tom and Rachel, a married couple just around our age. Tom and I would occasionally grab a beer together, and Sarah quickly became close with Rachel. It was a perfect little setup. 2 couples, no kids, no drama, and plenty of weekend BBQs. It started out small. I remember the first time I noticed something felt different. Sarah had begun spending a lot of time at Tom and Rachel's place, helping Rachel redecorate or planning some neighborhood get-together. She would always tell me about it, laughing about some ridiculous thing Rachel said or how she was helping pick out new furniture for their living room. I didn't think much of it then. In fact, I appreciated that Sarah had such good friends. I worked long hours, and I was happy she had a social life outside of our marriage. But as the months went by, Sarah seemed to spend more and more time there, specifically when Tom was around. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe I was being too sensitive, but there was something about the way she talked about Tom. How he was so funny or how Tom really knows how to fix things. I would brush it off, telling myself I was just overthinking it. Then, one evening, Sarah came home late from Rachel's. We lost track of time, she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek before disappearing into the shower. She seemed distant. Her phone, which she normally left on the kitchen counter or living room table, was now constantly glued to her hand or tucked into her back pocket. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Tom was married, Rachel was her friend, and Sarah was my wife. But something gnawed at me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but that invisible thread of doubt was starting to unravel, slowly but surely. The nagging feeling I had was getting harder to ignore. Sarah was still the same loving wife in most ways, but there were small changes, little things that didn't seem like much on their own, but together they painted a different picture. She'd always been open with her phone, leaving it lying around without a second thought. But lately, she seemed to keep it close, even when she went to the bathroom. Whenever it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly and put it down without a word. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just busy with work messages, or maybe it was just a new habit of always being connected. After all, everyone's glued to their phones these days, right? Then there were the conversations. Whenever I asked her about Rachel, she'd talk about her as usual, but when Tom's name came up, I noticed her responses became a little too casual. Like she was trying not to give away too much, as if she was choosing her words carefully. And when I pressed her on what they'd been doing when she spent time over there, she'd give vague answers like, "Oh, we were just hanging out," or "I helped Tom with something around the house." It wasn't that Sarah had suddenly become cold or distant. In fact, she was more affectionate than ever, almost as if she was overcompensating. She'd initiate more hugs, longer kisses, and talk about how much she loved me. But it felt forced, like she was trying to distract me from something. The real turning point came one night when we had Tom and Rachel over for drinks. We were all sitting around the fire pit in our backyard, laughing and enjoying a few beers. At one point, I caught Sarah and Tom sharing a look. It was quick, subtle, but it sent a chill down my spine. It was the kind of look you give someone when you share a secret. I try to push it out of my mind. After all, it could have been anything, a joke I wasn't in on, something harmless. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on. And the worst part? I had no proof. It was just a gut feeling, a sense that something wasn't right. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending nothing was happening. That look between Sarah and Tom stuck with me for days. I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. Every time I tried to convince myself it was nothing, my gut would twist, reminding me that something was off. The next weekend, Sarah told me she was going over to Rachel's to help with some new home project. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but this time, my suspicions were on high alert. I pretended to be cool about it. "Sure, go ahead," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I'll just catch up on some work here." As soon as she left, I got up and paced around the house, trying to decide what to do. I wasn't the kind of guy to snoop, but I needed to know if I was imagining things or if there was really something going on. I grabbed my keys and decided to go for a drive. I told myself I wasn't going to spy on her. Not really. I just wanted to drive by, see if everything was normal. Maybe catching a glimpse of them all together would ease my mind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was looking for confirmation of my worst fears. As I pulled up near Tom and Rachel's house, I parked a couple of houses down and waited. My heart pounded as I watched the house, feeling a bit ridiculous for being here in the first place. What was I expecting to see? After about 20 minutes, my patience wore thin. I was about to leave when I saw movement. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Tom walking into the living room alone. No sign of Rachel. A moment later, Sarah appeared behind him, laughing at something he said. It wasn't the laughter that bothered me. It was the way she looked at him. Her eyes lingering a little too long, a smile that seemed a little too genuine. I couldn't take it. I started the car and drove home, my mind racing the entire way. There was nothing scandalous about what I saw, but my gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. If Rachel was there, why hadn't she come into the room? And why did Sarah seem so comfortable, so at ease around Tom? That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what I'd seen, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something had shifted in our marriage. Sarah wasn't the same, and neither was our relationship. I knew I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let this fester. But what? Confront her? Accuse her without proof? I needed more than just a gut feeling and a few suspicious glances. The cracks were starting to show, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The doubt was eating away at me. After that night, I couldn't look at Sarah the same. Every time she left the house, I wondered where she was really going. Every time she smiled at me, I questioned if it was genuine or just a cover for what was happening behind my back. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, but I also knew that confronting her without solid proof could backfire. If I was wrong, I'd look like a paranoid fool, and I didn't want to risk that. So, I decided I needed a plan, a way to get real answers. The following weekend, Sarah told me she was meeting Rachel and Tom to help with another project. The moment she left, I started putting my plan into motion. I had read about apps that could track someone's phone location without them knowing. It wasn't something I ever imagined I'd use, but desperate times called for desperate measures. After some research, I found what I needed and managed to install a tracking app on Sarah's phone while she was in the shower. It wasn't easy, and I felt sick to my stomach for doing it. But I had to know. I had to find out if my worst fears were true. The app would give me access to her location in real time, allowing me to see exactly where she was going when she left the house. It wasn't something I was proud of, but the alternative, living with doubt and suspicion, felt worse. I watched the app for the rest of the day. Sarah went to Rachel and Tom's as planned, and for the next few hours, her location didn't change. It seemed innocent enough. Maybe they were just working on their project, like she said. But later that night, just after I thought everything was normal, her location pinged at a place I didn't expect, a small park on the edge of town. It didn't make sense. She hadn't mentioned going anywhere else, and there was no reason for her to be at that park, especially so late. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, watching her little blue stay at that park for almost an hour. What was she doing there? And, more importantly, who was she with? When Sarah came home that night, I acted like everything was normal. But inside, I was a wreck. I wanted to ask her where she'd been, but I knew I had to play it cool. I couldn't let her know I was tracking her. Not yet. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the tracker. Every time Sarah left the house, I'd check her location. Most of the time, it was where she said she'd be, Rachel's house, the grocery store, the gym. But once in a while, her location would pop up at that park again, or at random places that didn't match her story. It wasn't enough to confront her, but it was enough to drive me crazy. I knew I had to get more proof. Like everything was normal, yet my heart raced with anxiety. I repeatedly glanced at my phone, almost willing it to notify me that something was amiss. But the app remained still, a silent witness to my spiraling paranoia. As the hours unfolded, I tried to distract myself with chores and television, but every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the house. My mind raced through possible scenarios. What could they possibly be working on together that required hours of her time? It was just a project, I told myself, yet a sinking feeling confirmed that I was grasping at straws. Finally, at around 6 p.m., I saw her location change. She was moving, but where? I opened the app, and a map appeared, indicating she had left Rachel and Tom's house and was heading somewhere unfamiliar. My gut twisted as I watched the dip representing her begin to bounce from street to street. A whirlwind of anxiety swept over me. I fought against the gnawing urge to jump into my car and follow her. Yet the thought crossed my mind more than once. What if she was just running an errand? But the errand I imagined had an unsettling overtone. It was well past dark when the dust stopped for a significant duration, and I leaned in closer, my heart pounding fiercely. I took a deep breath, rationalizing my need to know, and tapped on the live location details. The name of the place registered in my mind like. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, watching her little blue to stay at that park for almost an hour. What was she doing there? And more importantly, who was she with? When Sarah came home that night, I acted like everything was normal. But inside, I was a wreck. I wanted to ask her where she'd been, but I knew I had to play it cool. I couldn't let her know I was tracking her. Not yet. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the tracker. Every time Sarah left the house, I'd check her location. Most of the time, it was where she said she'd be, Rachel's house, the grocery store, the gym. But once in a while, her location would pop up at that park again, or at random places that didn't match her story. It wasn't enough to confront her, but it was enough to drive me crazy. I knew I had to get more proof. Like everything was normal, yet my heart raced with anxiety. I repeatedly glanced at my phone, almost willing it to notify me that something was amiss. But the app remained still, a silent witness to my spiraling paranoia. As the hours unfolded, I tried to distract myself with chores and television, but every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the house. My mind raced through possible scenarios. What could they possibly be working on together that required hours of her time? It was just a project, I told myself, yet a sinking feeling confirmed that I was grasping at straws. Finally, at around 6 p.m., I saw her location change. She was moving, but where? I opened the app, and a map appeared, indicating she had left Rachel and Tom's house and was heading somewhere unfamiliar. My gut twisted as I watched the dip representing her begin to bounce from street to street. A whirlwind of anxiety swept over me. I fought against the gnawing urge to jump into my car and follow her. Yet the thought crossed my mind more than once. What if she was just running an errand? But the errand I imagined had an unsettling overtone. It was well past dark when the dust stopped for a significant duration, and I leaned in closer, my heart pounding fiercely. I took a deep breath, rationalizing my need to know, and tapped on the live location details. The name of the place registered in my mind like a treacherous alarm bell. The Blue Orchid. It was a local bar, a place that had a reputation for being favored by couples engaging in affairs. Suddenly, I felt like I had been deprived of breath, the weight of my suspicions bearing down on me with an unbearable force. In a haze of confusion and dread, I felt a conflicting pull. Should I confront her? Should I drive there immediately to catch her in the act? Yet a sensible part of me urged caution. If I was wrong, I'd ruin everything between us. I needed to think. Instead of making any reckless decision right away, I decided to give it some time. Perhaps the best course was to observe what unfolded that night, merely an observer of my twisted reality. As night deepened, I found myself ruthlessly scrolling through social media, pulling up photos of Sarah at various events, her smiling, laughing, the joy in her eyes almost taunting me now. Those moments felt agonizingly distant, as if they belonged to someone else's life. Time moved excruciatingly slow until finally my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the tracking app. Her location was moving again. Defiantly, I opened the map and traced the dot to where it was heading. Just then, an unfamiliar name flashed across my screen with a single, chilling revelation. Sarah was driving in the direction of a different bar, the Whispering Willow. The name resonated with me. I had heard whispers among friends about this place. Rumors of clandestine meetings and secret affairs hung around it like a noose. That gut-wrenching feeling morphed into anger, a burning sense of betrayal igniting my instincts. Should I go there, confront her, unearth whatever she was hiding? The temptation was overwhelming. Still, the voice of reason fought back. Think go slow. After minutes that felt like hours, I made a decision. I grabbed my coat, steeling myself for whatever awaited me. If I were to face the truth, I had to face her as well. I needed closure, emotions be damned. I slipped into my car, adrenaline surging through my veins as I navigated the darkened streets, following the familiar path to the Whispering Willow. Upon arrival, I parked discreetly, my heart racing as I scanned the crowd. Warm lights glimmered through the frosted windows, adding an allure that made it hard to breathe. I took a moment to breathe deeply, reminding myself of the objective. Find out the truth, stand firm, no matter how gut-wrenching it might be. I stepped out of my car and approached the entrance, my mind racing with all the possible outcomes. I paused at the door, a wave of hesitation washing over me. What if everything was innocent? What if I became the villain in this story? But what if, taking one last moment to collect myself, I pushed the door open. The scent of cheap beer and laughter filled my nostrils as I peered into the dimly lit room. Among the gathered crowd, my eyes searched frantically for her. And then, like an unwelcome punch to the gut, I spotted her. There she was, Sarah. She was laughing, her eyes sparkling with a joy that felt painfully foreign. She sat at a small round table, leaning in closely toward a man I didn't recognize. Their chemistry was electric. Their laughter mingled like an illicit dance. The sight felt like shards of glass piercing my heart. I stood frozen, feeling the ground shift beneath me. Every ounce of trust one had in our relationship began to crumble right before my eyes. Gripped by a mix of betrayal and shame, I realized that I finally had the proof, but knew deep down it was proof of something I feared more than anything. I was losing her, and I had no clue how to reclaim what was slipping away. I felt both the urge to confront her and the impulse to turn away, irrevocably altering the landscape of my life. In that moment, I became acutely aware that the night was just beginning, an unfolding tragedy that would do more than merely provide answers. I was about to face a truth that would change everything. With a shaky breath, I took a step forward, deciding once and for all to confront the dark reality lurking in Sarah's absence. Decided to take a moment to collect my thoughts. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the cool surface grounding me amidst the swirling emotions. My mind raced, weighing my options. Could I trust my instincts, or was this paranoia getting the best of me? I felt utterly torn between the urge to protect my relationship and the need to respect her autonomy. After a few deep breaths, I grabbed my phone again and hesitated. I wanted to call her, to hear her voice, but the uncertainty of what I might hear paralyzed me. Instead, I chose to send a simple text, hoping to gauge her whereabouts without raising alarm. Hey, just checking in. How's your afternoon going? I pressed send and watched the message disappear into the void. Seconds turned into minutes, and I found my gaze drifting to the map again, my heart leaping as I noticed the dot moving once more. It didn't linger long. Soon it disappeared from view, as if she were dancing around an invisible boundary that pinned me in with dread. All the while, I felt the tug of curiosity gnaw at me, compelling me to act. I slipped on my jacket and grabbed my keys, thoughts racing. I had to know. As I drove, the familiar streetlights slowly gave way to the dim glow of the Blue Orchid's neon sign looming ahead. I parked a short distance away and tried to steady my breathing. What would I say? Would I just burst in and confront her? Or would I wait and watch? The parking lot buzzed with a mix of laughter and conversation, but my focus narrowed to the entrance. I needed to be subtle, to blend in and observe. I exited my car, taking a moment to shake off the chill of anxiety gripping my body. As I stepped inside, the smoke-filled air enveloped me, and the thick ambience of chatter drowned out reason. My heart raced as I scanned the room, searching for a familiar face amidst the crowds. Then, there she was, sitting in a booth in the far corner, laughing with someone. My breath caught as I strained to see who it was. The light was dim, but I pushed ahead through the cluster of bodies, every beat of music blasting in tandem with my pulse. As I drew closer, I finally caught sight of her companion. My heart plummeted. It was Tom. They leaned in together, sharing a joke, their laughter intertwining in a way that made the air feel heavy. I stepped back instinctively, nearly losing my footing as the ground shifted beneath me. The images of them together crashed against the wall of my mind like waves breaking against a rocky shore. I wanted to walk away, to breathe, to regain control of my spinning thoughts, but there I stood, anchored by confusion and hurt. Questions swirled. Were they just friends? Were my fears unfounded? The light-hearted glances exchanged between them painted a picture I feared to unravel. Then came the moment that shattered my already frail composure. Tom leaned in close, brushing back a tendril of her hair, a gesture that felt far too intimate for comfort. I felt my fists clench, anger mingling with sorrow as I considered my next steps. Should I confront them? Storm up to their table and demand answers? Or was it better to retreat and gather information, try to see if there was more to this than met the eye? In that moment, I realized I was standing at a precipice, and the choice I made next would shape not just my understanding of the situation, but the very fabric of our relationship. As my heart raced and my breath quickened, I braced myself for the impending confrontation, whatever form it might take. A blur of movement caught my eye, and I felt a pang in my chest. She was leaning in close to a man with tousled hair and an easy smile. The laughter seemed genuine, their chemistry palpable even from a distance. I slipped further inside, clutching my phone as if it were a lifeline. Thoughts spiraled in my mind. Who was he? Was he just a friend, or something more? Each heartbeat pulsed with a mix of jealousy and anxiety. The atmosphere hummed with music and muted conversation, but all I could hear was the static of my apprehension. I found a small table near the bar, giving me a vantage point where I could watch without drawing attention. The bartender had a warm smile, but I forced a grin back, barely able to focus on the drink menu. My attention was solely on her, the way she tossed her head back in laughter, her eyes sparkling like I hadn't seen in weeks. It made me wonder, when was the last time I'd made her laugh like that? The man leaned in closer, whispering something that broke their laughter into a soft moment. I couldn't make out the words, but her face flushed slightly as she replied, her voice just out of earshot. It felt like every second stretched into eternity, and with each passing moment, the knot in my stomach tightened. As they continued their conversation, I felt a surge of resolve wash over me. I had to know what was going on. I steadied my breath and, with a quick glance to ensure I looked calm, approached her booth. "Hey," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mind if I join you?" Her eyes widened in surprise, and I could see the shift in her expression, a mix of delight and confusion. She glanced at the man beside her, who offered a polite smile, though I read a hint of curiosity in his gaze. "Of course," she replied, her smile warm but uncertain. "This is Jason," the man interjected, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you." I shook his hand, trying to suppress the instinctive surge of competition rising within me. I slid into the booth, my heart pounding. "What brings you here?" I asked, looking directly at her, desperately wanting to catch a glimpse of her truth behind the surface smile. "Oh, just a night out with friends," she replied, her eyes darting between me and Jason. We were reminiscing about old times. Jason and I go way back. As she spoke, I watched her closely, searching for any signs of deceit or discomfort. I noticed how she seemed a little more animated around him, her laughter spilling effortlessly. "I didn't realize," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I thought you were going to be working late." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I managed to get off early. Thought I'd have some fun for a change." The words sent another wave of unease crashing over me. Fun. If I were honest, I couldn't remember the last time we had fun together. But there she was, reveling in moments with someone else. Trying to shake off the spiraling thoughts, I focused instead on Jason. "So, how do you two know each other?" I asked, forcing my inflection into polite curiosity rather than pointed interrogation. "We met at university," he said, leaning back, visibly relaxed. "Did a few projects together in our drama club. Never thought we'd end up here, though." He laughed, a sound that felt both pleasant and grating to my ears. As I smiled and nodded, carefully scanning her face for any flicker of guilt or longing, I knew deep down this moment was the tipping point. Would tonight mark a new chapter for us? Or would it reveal a truth I was too afraid to acknowledge? "Glad to see you're enjoying yourself," I finally said, turning my gaze back to her, searching for the connection we once had. "I really miss us, the two of us." Her smile faltered slightly before returning, and I prayed she could still see the us I longed to discover again. In that moment, amidst the laughter and chatter, I knew it was now or never to unravel the truth standing between us and the bright spark we'd once shared. I shook his hand, trying to suppress the instinctive surge of competition that raced through me. "Nice to meet you, Jason," I said, forcing a smile that betrayed none of my inner turmoil. As I slid into the booth across from them, I felt a rush of adrenaline. Her gaze flickered between Jason and me, an unspoken question hanging in the air. "So, what are you two talking about?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just catching up on old times," she replied, her cheeks still slightly flushed. "Jason and I went to high school together." "Yeah, a lifetime ago," Jason added with a nostalgic grin. "It's wild to see how much has changed since then." "Yeah, I can imagine," I said, nodding towards the both of them, trying to keep my cool while internally I was unraveling. "What have you been up to since then?" As they shared stories about past antics and mutual friends, I listened more than I spoke. The thought of their shared history gnawed at me, cracking my facade of nonchalance. Each laugh felt like a reminder of my own shortcomings, how disconnected we had become over the past few months. "The last time I saw you was at that graduation party, right?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with recognition. "Right? You were the one who tried to show off your dance moves and ended up in the pool," she chuckled, and Jason laughed with her, their shared moment almost magnetic. I couldn't help but notice the easy way they connected, the playful banter that had sparked between them. "What about you?" she asked, turning her focus back to me. "What have you been up to?" "Oh, the usual, work and trying to build up a life," I replied, keeping it vague. I didn't want to spill my frustrations about how lost I felt, especially not with someone else at the table who seemed to have it all figured out. "Still at the design firm?" she probed. "Yes, still there," I said, forcing a smile. "Busy as ever, though." Just then, the waitress arrived with our drinks, and for a moment, the table was silent. I took a sip, hoping to buy myself some time to come up with a better response, or at least think of a way to regain control of the conversation. But as I looked at her, I noticed the warmth in her eyes that had once been reserved just for me. It was stifling, and I felt the walls closing in. After a brief pause, I took a leap. "So, Jason, how long are you in town for?" "Just a few days," he replied. "I'm here visiting family, and thought I'd reconnect with some old friends. It's good to see someone from that chapter of my life." "Yeah, it's nice, isn't it?" I chimed in, forcing a casual tone, but my heart raced. "Always good to catch up." "Definitely," Jason agreed, shooting me an appreciative glance, unaware of the brewing storm beneath my surface. As we continued the conversation, I could sense the delicate balance shifting. I needed to steer it in my favor, to open up a dialogue that might pull her back to me. "So, what about you? What have you been doing these days?" She seemed caught off guard, and I could see the flicker of uncertainty dart across her features. "Oh, just work and a bit of travel. I was in Europe for a few weeks last month." "Europe sounds amazing. What was your favorite part?" I asked, encouraging her as best I could, hoping to ignite the excitement that used to come so easily when we talked. "It was incredible. Paris was magical, but the Amalfi Coast stole my heart." She smiled, and a spark of the old connection lit between us. "I wish you could have come," she added, her expression shifting to something more sincere. There was an opening. "I wish I could have too," I said, leaning in slightly. "I've missed our adventures together. We should plan something." Her eyes brightened, and for a brief moment I felt hopeful. But Jason's presence lingered heavily in the air. As I looked back at him, smiling politely, I felt a pang of desperation. This was my chance to reclaim what felt lost, to remind her of the connection we had. And I wasn't going to let it go easily. Just then, the waitress approached with a tray of drinks, breaking the current strain of conversation. She placed a vibrant cocktail in front of each of us, and I absent-mindedly stirred my drink with a straw, watching the vibrant colors swirl together. "Cheers!" Jason exclaimed, lifting his glass. We all mirrored his gesture, the clinking of glasses momentarily shrouding any lingering tension. "So, what do you think about the new developments in town?" I asked, trying to redirect the focus and reclaim some control over the conversation. "I think it's amazing. The whole downtown area is getting revitalized," she replied, her enthusiasm palpable. "There's talk of new restaurants, and they even want to create a park right by the old theater." "Really?" Jason leaned in, genuinely intrigued. "I've heard about that. I can't wait to see it. It'll definitely bring more life to the area." As they continued to chat about the changes and what it could mean for the community, I felt like an observer in my own life. It was difficult to interject, to find a foothold in a conversation that flowed so easily between them. I grinned and nodded, but my thoughts swirled with a mix of admiration and jealousy. "Have you been to the old theater since they announced the renovations?" I finally asked, desperate to engage. "No, not yet. I've heard it's supposed to be beautiful," she said, her eyes lighting up at the possibility. "It is. They had an amazing film festival last year," I offered, my voice gaining momentum. "I think they plan to do something similar once it's renovated. It's a great spot for community events." "Sounds like it'll be a lot of fun," Jason added, casually leaning back in his seat. I could see the rapport they shared. It was engaging, but also felt like a wedge pressing against me. "So, are you thinking of moving back here once everything is complete?" she asked suddenly, curiosity mixed with hope. "Maybe in the future. I love the energy here, but I've got quite a few projects keeping me busy." I glanced at Jason, noticing the way he effortlessly countered my responses with his own tales of wanderlust and adventure. "I get that," she said, pulling her hair back behind her ear, a classic nervous tic that reminded me of our early days together. "But it would be nice to have you back around. The more, the merrier." The words hit me, a pang of nostalgia lining the edges of my thoughts. I instantly replayed the laughter, the debates, the dreams we had shared. It was all still there, somehow tethered beneath the surface. "Yeah, definitely. Maybe I'll make a weekend visit soon," I said, my heart racing at the prospect of reconnecting. "It would be great to catch up properly, maybe all of us together." The idea sat heavy in the air, and as she smiled back at me, I realized that despite the underlying tension, perhaps it wouldn't just be about reclaiming what I felt was slipping away. It would be about building new memories, as fragile and uncertain as they might be. "Let's make it happen," she replied, her gaze steady. "I'd love that." And just like that, the conversation veered into lighter territory. Favorite bands, upcoming concerts, and even embarrassing childhood memories. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope igniting in the space between us, filling the gaps left by insecurities and the past. "Of this place," I replied, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. Yet the thought of moving back was complicated. So many memories tangled with this town, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them. "I can understand that," Jason chimed in, oblivious to the complexity of my feelings. "I missed this town when I moved away. There's something about it that just feels like home." His gaze drifted around the bar, settling on an old poster from a festival long past. Its colors faded, but still vibrant in a nostalgic way. "Exactly. I thought I'd lost that sense of belonging, but re-exploring places I used to hang out has brought it all back," she added, her tone reflective. "Even just walking down Main Street feels different now, doesn't it?" "Yeah, it does. It's almost like the bricks themselves remember," I said, letting the memories wash over me. I could picture the corners we once traipsed through, our laughter echoing down the alleys. Each familiar spot held its own story, its own significance, and for a moment, the weight of nostalgia pressed lightly on my chest. "What about you?" I directed the question at her. "What do you miss most about living here?" She thought for a moment, her eyes narrowing in concentration. Probably the community events. The Halloween parade was always a highlight. I love dressing up and seeing everyone else's costumes. Oh, and the summer concerts in the park were amazing. There was always such a good vibe. Jason nodded. Yeah, those were a blast. I remember the year you went as a pirate. And what was your dog's name again? Captain? He laughed, and she joined in. Captain Snickers, she said, her face lighting up with the memory. He always wore a little pirate hat. Everyone loved him. As they reminisced, I felt a pang of something, maybe longing or perhaps exclusion. It didn't help that they had their own shared experiences that felt so effortless, while I was just piecing together my memories like an incomplete puzzle. Speaking of community events, do you guys think you'll come to the festival next month? I interjected, trying to steer the conversation towards something we could all share. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Jason declared, his excitement evident. They've got an amazing lineup this year. Live music, food stalls, everything. I'll be there too, she agreed, enthusiasm bubbling in her voice. It's supposed to be bigger than ever. We should all go together, make a day of it. Yeah, that sounds great, I replied, forcing a smile, even as uncertainty creeped into my mind. Would it really be fun? I didn't want to be the odd one out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the outside looking in. The waitress returned with another round of drinks, and I took a deep breath. I knew I had to change my perspective if I wanted to truly enjoy this. I could choose to be part of this moment, or I could let my insecurities hold me back. Let's make a plan, I said, a fresh determination in my voice. We'll coordinate our outfits and meet up early for some food. It'll be an adventure. Jason raised his glass again, a knowing look in his eyes. Now that's the spirit. Here's to old friends and new beginnings. Cheers to that, she echoed, her smile genuine. As we clinked our glasses again, feeling the vibrations of camaraderie, I allowed myself to revel in the moment just a bit longer. Maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to feeling at home in this town again, alongside these familiar faces, weaving new memories into the fabric of my life. As I walked out the door, I felt a sense of relief, but also a deep sadness. I knew I would never forget Sarah, but I also knew I needed to move on and find a way to heal. I had lost a part of myself, but I was determined to find a new path, one that led to a brighter future, free from the shadows of doubt and betrayal.